everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation. Yesterday, Dr. Pandit laid the foundations of the general principles of whether God exists. Tonight's presentation is about evolution fundamental. Is it scientific? I really enjoyed yesterday's presentation, and I hope you will be blessed with this one too. I will now hand over to Dr. Pandit.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So it's good to be with you again. And so let's start this afternoon's program. And we will start by making a quick review. It's on the screen. The first thing we want to do is become neutral inquirers, not believing or disbelieving inquirers. So that's a challenge, and it's a really a great challenge, and I would like us to take up this challenge. It is not easy. We often go back to our previous way of thinking, and even all the questions that I've read so far are basically from believing inquirers. So once again, go ahead and ask the questions, but recognize that our challenge is really to become an neutral inquirer, not a believing or disbelieving. So you're not really a Christian right now, at least for the time of this seminar. So we will go from there. Neutral inquiry. What does he do? He always makes two options and looks at both of them. We look at them to do what? The weight of evidence. In other words, both sides will have good points. What we want to know is whether this side is heavier somehow. And even if it's a little heavier, well, that's the side that we go to. Number two, we set the criteria that we are going to use. And we told ourselves yesterday that the criteria we will use is evidence, reason, and logic. And with that, we said we would form an atmosphere so that we can continue being neutral inquirers. And what is that atmosphere formed by? 1, humility, 2, honesty, 3, calmness, and 4, respect. With this, we went in to do the PAN process. The PAN process is a process of inquiry in which you look at both the options. So we looked at both, pro or for, and a con or against, both the options, theism and atheism. And what was our conclusion yesterday? That scientific information and rational thinking clearly points to the existence of God. So it is rational, it is reasonable, it is logical to say beyond the natural, there is something known as the supernatural, and we can say that the being who lives there is God. So that's what we came to yesterday. But there is a theory out there that challenges this notion as well. And that's what we're going to look today. It is called the theory of evolution. And we're going to look at two things, the fundamentals of that theory, as well as whether it really is a scientific theory. But before we go into that, we have to ask ourselves, what are the premises? Why are we looking at this? And what are the earlier points we need to look at before getting into it? So here are the 4 things we're going to look at before we get into evolution. The reason, the meaning of the word evolution, and then we look at the biological classification that there is of all the organisms on Earth, and then what is known as concepts of evolution. That is because it is used in such a broad way. Sometimes we do not know what we are actually meaning by the word evolution, and I will show it to you in just a little bit. That is to help us understand what we are talking about, and especially when we want to speak to somebody else. So here, the reason to study evolution, if the theory of evolution has a reasonable and a scientific base, then the study of nature, which is laws of nature, could show that God is not needed. In fact, maybe even non-existent, despite what we saw yesterday. But if it is not scientific, if it is not a reasonable theory, then the study of nature, the laws of nature, and what we see around us could endorse the claim that God is essential in our universe and therefore is factual and in existence. So that is the reason we are looking at this theory today, to decide whether it is scientific or not. Is it reasonable? The meaning of the word evolution? First of all, evolution just means gradual changes resulting in improvement over a period of time. Whereas the theory of evolution is very specific. It stands for a type of evolution described by Charles Darwin. The starting point was a simple organism like a virus or a bacterium, which gradually changed over vast periods of time, resulting in the entire spectrum of living organisms in the world today. And what is that entire spectrum? And here's the biological classification of what we have on Earth in biological forms or organisms. Species, which can change to subspecies, variations, and breed. That we know because we have seen it, we have tested it. So species can change to subspecies and variations. If you just leave them, they do. The next level of classification is genus. So from species, many of them change and become another genus. And then genus to family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, and domain. Number 8 is domain. So what do we mean by just the word evolution? It means just number 1, species forming variations and subspecies. Whereas the theory of evolution says that the changes occurred from species to species, from them to another genus, family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, and domain. So the spectrum of classification is what we must keep in mind when we talk about the theory of evolution. Concepts of evolution. Now, when we use the word evolution between those who talk in our conversations, sometimes we don't decide or define what we are meaning when we use the word evolution. So I'm going to list some of these out. You don't have to understand all of them. Just know that there are many different ways of using the word evolution. And if there are so many different ways, when you are having a chat with yourself too, or with somebody else, try to define what you are talking about. So here goes. The first one is cosmic evolution. In other words, how did the universe come about? It's called cosmic evolution. Then when it came out only as radiation, pure energy. How did that change to become stars and galaxies? That is stellar evolution. Then how did those gases become solids? Chemical evolution. How did they become rocks like granite or gold, solid? Then how did that structure, rocks, how did that become cellular? So now we have another evolution there, or a change. How did those rocks become cellular? And that's called organic evolution. How did it become organic from non-organic to organic? And then how did that cellular structure get life into it by itself? I call it zoontic evolution. Zoo in Greek means life. So how did life come? And then comes Darwinian evolution, in which one organism became many and carried on and on. So that is the theory of evolution. And at the 6th level, if you notice, 6A is evolution, which the normal word we use is actually microevolution. That's the other word for just evolution. Whereas if you talk about Darwinian evolution, the word is macro, big evolution. That's the theory of evolution. Whereas the word is micro, or small variations. Now we go to the fundamental factors. There are at least 3 fundamental factors that are required to establish this theory, or it is stated in the theory. Number 1, chance, which says that all events happened were solely by chance. Intellectual thinking and purposeful activity played no part in evolution. Number 2, time. Since the changes in the organisms were very, very tiny and small, the time required was billions and more of years. And number 3, selection. You've heard the word natural selection. When you look at that, you require actually more than selection. You require adding genetic material. Did that take place? So in these 3 fundamental factors, let's find out whether these things actually are are a basis of the theory. Number one, chance. Actually, we looked at it yesterday. Remember, we said probability? So, chance events occur arbitrarily and in a haphazard and unpredictable manner. Rules and patterns do not govern them. Hence, a certain number of chances are required for a certain outcome. That number can be mathematically calculated using a formula called probability. We saw that yesterday. Just toss the numbers into that formula and out comes the chance. Therefore, the claim of a chance event can be subjected to a mathematical study. Actually, we did that yesterday. So let's look at it. If the number of chances required is too big, then the event did not occur by chance. Rather, some agent or an agency performed that event. Yesterday, we saw that to establish a scientific law, the number is arbitrarily set at 10 to the power of 50. 1 followed by 50 zeros. So what we are saying is if a chance event requires that many chances for it to happen just once, then the outcome is considered impossible by chance. And if it did occur, then the event was purposeful. It was an act by an agent. We see the number is huge, 1 followed by 50 zeros. So here's an idea of what that number is. If 10 billion humans tested out a theory once every second, okay, all 10 billion of us, every second since the time of the Big Bang, which is about 13.72 or 15 billion years ago, by today we would have reached only 10 to the power of 28 times. So 10 to the power of 50 is a huge number. The mathematicians have guesstimated for us that the entire universe contains 10 to the power of 84 elementary particles. Now, if there are that many, then they can also guess that there would have been at least 10 to the power of 20 interactions between those elementary particles every second. And how many seconds do we have from the starting of the Big Bang? 10 to the power of 18 seconds. So the universe, when you multiply all of them together, the complete and total chance afforded by the universe is 10 to the power of 122. 10 to the power of 122. Therefore, any event that requires more chances should be classed as absolutely, utterly impossible. We saw this yesterday. Sir Michael Denton stated that to get 100 proteins together to form the simplest cell is 1 chance in 10 to the power of 2,000. Possible or impossible by chance? How about Harold Morowitz's one? The number of chances needed to get the components of a single human cell together to be 10 to the power of 100 billion. Not 100 billion, 10 to the power of 100 billion. And that is just to get the stuff together. We still have to tell them what to do to each other, all the little components. We have to put life. We haven't added that yet into it, the computation of that. Put life, ask it to change, and cut itself into 2, and both of them will still be alive. And then they multiply or cut some more, become more and more complex, and then they begin their life. We don't know how. Excuse me. And then after multiplying, they become complex and more complex and become plants and animals. And finally, they become human beings. And as a human being, you start thinking. Where did the thinking come from? We have things like, love and chivalry and bravery. Where did all these things? This is not in the 10 to the power of 100 billion. Can you see what we are trying to talk about? So the number of chances required to form life from inanimate matter is big enough to bury Darwin and the whole theory of evolution. They must therefore have been the product of purposeful intelligence. This is from Sir Fred Hoyle, a mathematician and a scientist from the UK. So the origin and perpetuation of life was not a chance event, but was accomplished by a volitional act of an intelligent agent. How about the requirement of time? George Levine, in introduction to the book Origin of Species, says, it was Charles Lyell who supplied Darwin with the notion of geological time stretching into millions of years. But these millions of years, they're a big, long number, but when you look at them, they are just inadequate. So the question really is not whether the universe is young or old, but whether an old universe, 13.72 to 15 billion years old, has enough time to do what it said it would do. So we're going to look at some examples. G.G. Simpson, a confirmed evolutionist, his calculations of rates of evolution show that the bat's wing is not made of feathers, it's a membrane. If it was evolved by normal Mendelian mutation and selective pressure, which means by the regular theory of evolution, it would have had to begin developing well before the origin of the Earth. By the way, the Earth's history is 4.5 billion years, but of this 4.5, we have only half a billion, 0.5 billion years of complex life. So just one part of one animal required more time than the age of the whole Earth. How much time do we have for the rest? Number 2, The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin, I have the book right here, has only one diagram in the book. Let me just show you the diagram. There's only one diagram in the book, and that is here. I hope you can see it. It has lines and some arrows going up and down. Those lines represent the number of generations required to change from one form to another. And at the end, for example, it suggests that it would require 10 million to a billion generations to finally form a well-defined variety of a species. So from species to a variety to subspecies to another species. So we have 3 changes there. So if it takes, we'll just do the 10 million one, not the billion, the smaller number. It would require, if one generation is 1 year, some have less and some have more. We are about 20 some years, one generation. The elephants are 30 years, one generation. But we'll just take one generation being 1 year for all the animals. Then it requires 30 million generations for species to species change. In other words, from one species to another, just at the species level. So if we have 1 million species, by the way, they have guesstimated that there were at least 18 million species, 8 million today and 10 million in the past. But we have documented only 1 million. So I'm just using that number, just 1 million out of the 18. If then 1 million species would require 30,000 billion years to form. And the age of the universe is only 13.72 billion years. The age of Earth only 4.5 billion. And of this, the time of complex life on Earth is only 0.5 billion years. So this theory trying to compress 30,000 billion years into just 0.5 is not a tenable theory. Number 3. Astronomers have told us that galaxies 12 billion light years away have been detected. All known galaxies are moving outwards from a central position. Our own Milky Way galaxy is moving at the speed of 19 billion kilometers per year. Even at 10 times that speed, it would require 7 trillion years, that is 7,000 billion years for that galaxy to have reached there. How does that compare with what we have as 13.72 billion? Just not enough time. How about natural selection? The word selection, it's interesting. Charles Darwin said this: nature, without God, selects only for the benefit of the being which she tends. In other words, whatever being or form or organism is there, nature tends it and selects things only for its benefit. So the question is, does this selection make the aggressor, like the tiger or lion, more likely to succeed, or the victim, the antelope, more likely to escape? Which one is it helping? Both are struggling to survive, and both are part of nature. So nature should tend to both. But then there's no selection. It's not selecting any, it's selecting both. If you selected every purpose and every process and every being, that's not selection at all. It is just doing something. There's no word as selection there. The word selection means, for example, when we are dealing with actual changes from one organism to another, is that you pick only what is available. If an organism has 10 units of genetic material, and that's what we are talking about when we talk about the theory of evolution, the maximum you can pick is 10 units. You can't pick more than 10 if there are not 10 in the basket. So look at the numbers. Simple organisms like bacteria have about 500,000 units of genetic material. Humans have about 3 billion. How did that little bacterium or virus come out to have that much of genetic material? The only way to bridge this huge gap would have been to add, not select. Because if you selected from 500,000 units, you will end up with only 500,000, not 3 billion. So the question is, did adding or accumulation take place? There was a landmark evolutionary conference held in Chicago in 1980. And here's what Roger Lewin said of that. He's a science reporter. The central question of the Chicago conference in 1980 was whether the mechanics underlying remember micro is just evolution, can be extrapolated to explain the phenomenon of macroevolution, Darwinian evolution. At the risk of doing violence to the positions of some at the meeting, the answer can be given as a clear no. And here's a statement from Francisco Ayala. He is a confirmed evolutionist. He said, I am now convinced from what the paleontologists, those who study fossils, say, that changes do not accumulate. So changes do not accumulate. So how can we say that the theory is viable and actually established as a scientific theory? Two more quick fundamental factors. A similarity of two organisms might point to the fact that they come from the same parent, that's called genealogy, and whether structural changes affect survival. This is what Charles Darwin said. We have no written pedigree. We have to make out community of descent by resemblance of any kind. That's from the book I just showed you, The Origin of Species. Now, the scientific data has shown the close ties between genes and the features they produce. Yeah, that we know. Genetic material produces these features. But that's not the basis of the theory. The theory says that this genetic material changed to some other genetic material in which the matter itself was added to have it more. In other words, there was an increase of genetic material. This genetic change has never been established. So Heribert Nielsen says, we have proved that similarity cannot be used as a proof for evolutionary relationship. Austin Clarke says there is not the slightest evidence that any one group of the major groups arose from any other. So the fundamental principle that similarity is based on genealogy lies unsubstantiated. It has not been shown. How about whether structural changes affect survival? Charles Darwin again. The slightest difference of structure or constitution may well turn the nicely balanced scale in the struggle for life and be preserved. In other words, if there is a little bit that is advantageous, then that organism will just grab it and keep the structural change in it. But he says the slightest difference, right? These slightest differences have never been described. Why? Because the tiny changes may not affect survival at all. For example, tell me, how much advantage would one giraffe have over another whose neck is just 1 inch longer than the other one? Any advantage? But it has to go slowly. So it has to do inch by inch. And only when it advantages will it hold that 1 inch extra long neck. But how much advantages is really it? The other factor is that habits have changed. This is again Charles Darwin. Habits have changed without a corresponding change in structure. What does that mean? You don't have to stretch out your neck. Just put your mouth a little higher, that's all. Just change your habit. Instead of eating from here, just push your mouth a little higher and eat from there. And you don't have to eat only from there. You can go down and eat from there too. So why do you need a long neck? But here's the observation. So genetic and structural changes are not essential for any enhanced survival. A small and effortless change in behavior, just push your mouth up a little bit, would be more than enough. And here's what we observe. Long-necked giraffes live among short-necked gorillas. They're staying in the same place and surviving. And even among forms that have no discernible necks like centipedes and worms. So a centipede doesn't have to pull out a long neck. It's living happily even now. So how can we establish the theory that says it had to have a long neck? No, the theory is not substantiated by the facts. When we look around us, you don't need to have a long neck to survive. The giraffe got a long neck. It had certain changes. It got a long neck. But it didn't do that to survive because even centipedes and worms are surviving in that same locality. So it's not a credible theory. So the fundamental principles, chance, requirement of deep time, which we saw billions of years, natural selection is not selection, and whether the fact that similarity points to genealogy, not found, structural changes required, no, you can just change a habit and it will be enough for your survival. Not a single fundamental principle has been satisfactorily established in the fundamentals of the theory of evolution. Sounds good as a theory, but when you really look into the details, it is not established. And so, let's take a break now, and then we'll go to the next question, which is it really a scientific theory? We will pit it against the criteria that we use when we study science and scientific theories. Let's take a break right now for a few seconds or even a minute or two. I know I've stated a lot in a short period of time. And when a person goes that fast, it's okay. If you didn't understand anything, just jot that part down and ask in the Q&A time, and we will answer that. We will address that. So if you have any questions, jot them down. Okay, let's continue. And now we're going to look at whether it is a scientific theory. So what do? We first write out or list the criteria that make a theory into a scientific theory, not just any theory. So here are the criteria. There are positive criteria, which a scientific theory should have and which should be present. And there are negative criteria too, that which should be absent from a good scientific theory. There are 4 of each. Let's look at all 8. Positive criteria. It should be a relatively new concept. It's no use hashing over the previous, somebody else had said something and you're saying it. That's not a good scientific theory. You must have it your own, so it must be a new concept. Do you know that natural selection was actually described earlier than Darwin? And by whom? By a creationist. Why did a creationist talk about natural selection? Because remember, we said that there is variations. Yes. And that's all that creationist said. Limited the changes to only variations or the micro level. That is what this person said, Edward Blythe. That there is natural selection, but it only goes to the micro level, only makes variations. So while natural selection was known before Darwin, he took it to a new level. We saw that. He went through all family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain, all of that. So, was it a new concept? Yeah, in one sense it was new. But let's test it out. And number two, it has to be testable. What's the meaning of testable? There's a big word here you can see on the screen, doctrine of falsifiability. Don't get afraid of that. It's very simple. I'll tell you what it is. A theory which is not refutable or challenged or proved wrong by any conceivable event is non-scientific. It has to be testable. And what's the meaning of testable? When you test it, if it is false, it should be shown false. That's the meaning of the word doctrine of falsifiability. When you do a test for a certain theory, in that data, you should also show which data will prove it false, not just which data will prove it correct. In other words, a scientific theory must not only allow itself to be shown correct by the data gathered, but must also allow itself to be shown wrong or false by any of the data so gathered. You must describe that. This latter part, showing it wrong, relates to the doctrine of falsifiability, which requires a description of the data that will prove it false if it is indeed false. That is the scientific meaning of testable. You must not say it in such a way that you don't show the data that might prove it false, only show the data that will prove it correct. That is not scientific. You must show it all. So here's what two evolutionists have said about the theory of evolution. Our theory of evolution has become one which cannot be challenged or tested or refuted by any possible observation. Every conceivable observation can be fitted into it. No one can think of ways to test it. Whether A happens, the theory is okay. Whether B happens, the theory is okay. Whether anti-A happens, also the theory is okay. Then that is not a scientific theory. They have become a part of an evolutionary dogma, accepted by most of us as part of our training. So the theory of evolution is not scientific because it is not testable. Did you know that? You can't test it. So if something grows big, that's also the theory of evolution. If it grows small, also it's the theory of evolution. How is that? How can you test that kind of a theory? It's a dogma and does not answer to the doctrine of falsifiability. What's a dogma? It's a claim or a statement that does not require any evidence for its support and will also not tolerate any degree of questioning or scrutiny or challenge. And we see that all over the world today. In the scientific world, you can challenge any theory on earth. Listen, you can challenge any theory on earth among the scientific community except the theory of evolution. Why? Because most likely, this is my guess, if you actually test it out, boy, there's a big question there. So don't even challenge it. It's a dogma. Don't even look at it to question it. Just accept it. Number 3, convincing data. Here's Stephen Gould. He is a paleontologist, one who studies fossils from Harvard University, a very famous man. He's the late Stephen Gould, but this is what he said. We fancy ourselves as the only true students of life's history. Yet to preserve our favored account of evolution by natural selection, we view our data as so bad that we never see the very process we profess to study. And how about this next sentence? This is by somebody else. When we descend to the details, we cannot prove that a single species has changed. How many species has changed? Not even one then. Nor can we prove that the supposed changes are beneficial, which is the groundwork of the theory, because the theory says only beneficial changes are held on to and passed on. So it has to be beneficial. So this statement says we can't prove even one species change to another. How about the rest? Genus, family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain. If the first one is not done, but who said these words? Do you know? Amazingly, it is Charles Darwin himself. So where's the theory now? So evolution requires intermediate forms between species, and paleontology, the study of fossils, does not provide them. Some 25 major phyla are recognized for all animals, and in virtually not a single case is there fossil evidence to demonstrate what the common ancestry or what the earlier form was of any of these two phyla. The known fossil record fails to document a single example of phyletic evolution accomplishing a major morphologic transition. In other words, there's no evidence, even in a single change, that the major theory of evolution has really taken place. In any local area, a species does not arise gradually by the steady transformation of its ancestors. It appears all at once and fully formed. So look at these two here. Phyla level and species level. They're far away. Species, genus, family, order, class, phylum. So at the phylum level, we don't have any evidence. At the species level also, we don't have any evidence of transformation. So transformation, big question. The demonstration of change from one species to another, which establishes genealogy, would require a smooth chain of intermediate forms linking this one to this one. Bitty little changes. Today, we have 250,000 species of fossils in the museums of the world. The largest collection is at the Museum of Natural History in Chicago in USA. In fact, I've been there. I wanted to see for myself. Boy, it's impressive. There's no question about it. But among these 250,000 species of fossils, how many smooth, unbroken chains would convincingly establish the theory? Here's one species, and here's another. We should have a chain of organisms that slowly show a little bit change and a little bit change, a little bit, finally it becomes this. Of these 250,000, how many chains do we have? How many chains will establish the theory? 1% or 10%? If it's 1%, we need 2,500 chains. How many do we have? Not even one. Not even one in all the 250,000 chances. Nobody knew better than Darwin what he had failed to prove. There's no more conclusive refutation of Darwinism than that furnished by paleontology, the study of these fossils. We find perfectly stable and unaltered forms that appear suddenly and at once in their definitive shape without transition types. Amazing information, right? The fourth thing on the positive side is it must be able to predict. Now, this is not predicting what will happen in the future. This is saying that if this theory is correct, then if you look there and do that test, it will happen like this. That's the meaning of predictive value. So here's a prediction by Charles Darwin. No organism wholly soft can be preserved because what is preserved is hard material which has then ossified or fossilized. But on observation, thousands of jellyfish, they're always soft. There is no skeleton in a jellyfish. Thousands of jellyfish, many bigger than a dinner plate, are found in at least 7 different horizons of sandstone. And that's why David Raup, who was the dean of the museum at Chicago, he said the predictive or post-dictive power of the theory is almost nil. You can't look at it and say what will happen if you look there. What will happen if you do this test to test it out? So all 4 we've seen of the positive side. Now of the negative side, you should not have this. In other words, number 1, ignorance. You must not say, I don't know. But look at what Charles Darwin says in the book, Origin of Species. Our profound ignorance, not just our ignorance, our profound ignorance. We know nothing about the origin or history of any of our domestic breeds. And I'm quoting the exact words from the book. Vertebrates have descended from an ancient prototype of which we know nothing. If you know nothing, then how do you know we came from there? Isn't that a good question? Lungfishes have their origins firmly based in nothing. And this is the president of the Linnean Society of London. I have often thought how little I should like to have to prove organic evolution in a court of law. What he's saying is, if you bring the evolution and test it in a court of law, it will fail. It does not have the evidence it's supposed to have. Number 2, circular reasoning. What's the meaning of circular reasoning? Here's an example. I say, I'm telling you the truth. And you say, How will I know that you are telling me the truth? And I answer and said, because I'm telling you. So I'm telling you the truth because I am telling you. That is circular reasoning. The place that gives you the statement is also the place that confirms the statement. That is circular reasoning. So now look at these two statements. Based on the theory of natural selection, all living species have been connected with the parent species of each genus. Now, this connection is the theory. So, what is it saying? Based on the theory is correct. How does that sound? Similarly, based on the theory of descent, these characters have been inherited from a common ancestor. Inheritance from a common ancestor is the theory. So, how can you say based on the theory is the theory? That is circular reasoning, and that's why D.V. Agar says we land ourselves immediately in an impossible circular argument. It goes, I am saying it, and I am telling you it's truth because I am telling you. That's not a good scientific theory. By making our explanation the definition of the condition to be explained, we express not scientific hypotheses, but belief, blind belief. Dogmatic endeavors of this kind must eventually leave the realm of science. Sometimes we have to ask, why didn't it already leave? That's a big question. We might have to discuss that sometime. How about contradictions? You must not say one thing and say another thing that contradicts the other one. But here are statements of that kind in the book, and I'm quoting all from The Origin of Species by Charles Darwin. One sentence here. We never know the exact character of the common ancestor, and in the same book, we may feel sure that these characters have been inherited from a common ancestor. How can you feel sure about something that you never know? That's not possible. Another two, the fossil evidence does not afford plain evidence of gradation, which the theory is supposed to show. And sentence number three, geology plainly declares that the species have changed in exactly that manner. How can you say it does not show and it also shows the same thing? How can both be correct? Contradictions are not supposed to be found in a good scientific theory. How about imagination? You must not ask me to imagine a scientific theory. A scientific theory is based on scientific data, not on imagination. If you ask me to do imagination, well then, let's see, Superman and Spider-Man, they're also real. Just imagine, that's all. No, it is good thus to try in our imagination to give any form some advantage over the other. Why is he asking us to use imagination? Because there's no data to substantiate it. So he's asking us to imagine. We have only to suppose this, and then everything will be okay. And George Levine in the introduction, which the book I just showed you, the 2004 edition, Darwin's imagination and his science, his imaginative science, that's an oxymoron, my friends. You cannot have imaginative science. Yes, you can state it as an imagination, but state that it is an imagination, not it is a scientific theory. You're allowed to think. Everybody is allowed to think. In fact, today, the theoretical physicists, they keep on thinking of all kinds of things outside the box, but they don't count them as scientific theories. They make those imaginations into some mathematical, formulae and try to figure out something. And then when there's enough evidence which can be tested, then it becomes a scientific theory. If you just ask me to use imaginative faculties of my brain, even 150 years after the theory was first established, then there's something wrong. And one can clearly say the reason why you are asking me to use my imagination is because there is insufficient real data that we can look into. So, the theory of evolution does not have any of the positive criteria, we saw 4 of them, that a solid scientific theory should have. On the contrary, it possesses all the negative criteria that a good scientific theory should not have. So it can be proposed as an opinion or an idea, but it has no grounds to be taught as scientific fact. We have already agreed that natural selection is a real phenomenon. The species can become a variety, can become a subspecies, but it does not produce more than that. It does not become another species, another genus and family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, domain. We have also agreed that evolution does occur that little bit. It's a limited process. Species form variations. But the theory of evolution, which states that the changes were unlimited, this went on from one to the other and involved the entire spectrum of biological classification, that till today still lacks a database. So what is it really then? I think the theory of evolution is not science. It's actually history. It's saying this one became this one over a long period of time. That's history. That's not science. It's a historical part that is thrown on to biology. But it is so bad history that nobody would teach it as such as history in a reputable school or university. Tell me, how many of you would believe me if I said I was a descendant of Alexander the Great? So you ask me, how do you connect yourself to Alexander the Great? There should be some people in between. And I say, no, there's nobody in between. I'm my father, his son. There's no chain at all connecting him and me. But he is my ancestor. I am his ancestor. You tell me, or he is my ancestor. How will you believe me? Without a single connection? That's exactly here. A form becomes B over 1,000,000 years without one single organism in between to connect them. Somebody's mic is on. Without a single organism. And here this is 1,000,000 years. Between Alexander the Great and me is only 2,500 years. So if there's none between him and me, you will dismiss my theory. Friends, you have to look at it as in a little more realistic way. The theory of science fails, the theory of evolution fails as science and flops as history. And for it to rise any higher than speculation, it must, and I'm quoting now, it must await the discovery of new natural laws, physical, chemical, and biological. And look at the title of this write-up, Inadequacies of the Neo-Darwinianism as a Scientific Theory. So the second proposition, remember we started off the whole session asking which of these would point to which. The second proposition is the more reasonable based on the scientific information in our hands today. And what is that? If the theory of evolution is not scientific, not reasonable, then nature could endorse the claim that God is essential and does in fact exist. And like Socrates, whom we quoted yesterday, who was quoted by Plato, go where the argument leads. Don't let anybody push you into any direction. You don't pull the argument in any direction you want to. Just look at the argument, the evidence, the database, and go where the argument leads. Question time.
Hi, Dr. Pandit. It's Brenda here. It looks like we do not have any questions so far. So have you got any questions that you've received previously that link to this topic?
I don't think most of them, no, not really. Most of them are really people who are Christians who have Christian questions. Very few of them look at this and actually question this. But I will mention some questions that I've had over the years that I take these seminars on university campuses. For example, one of them would ask, so you say evolution is in question. Why would you say then the Earth, if it's not billions of years old, then how old do you say the Earth is? Well, if it is not 4.5 billion years, then the claim is it's less than 10,000 years. Do you know what the ratio of that is? The ratio of 10,000 to 4.5 billion is 1 is to 450,000. So here's what I'd suggest when you want to ask that question. How old is the Earth or the universe? You draw a line and put 2 marks on the line from 0 to 4.5 billion years. Anywhere, you put it anywhere, and then you look for data that you can gather from around the world. And if the data shows anything, say, let's put it as 10 million years to 0, and 10 million years to 1.5 billion years is in between, and up greater than 1.5 billion years to 4.5 billion. So we got 3 sections on the line. If the data is this side of 10 or 100 million years, then it will point to 10,000 years. If it is beyond 1.5 billion years, then every data point over there will direct us to 4.5 billion years. And if it's in between, we will say we don't know. It's inconclusive. So when you look at that, we start looking at information that we can have and put them in their correct place. We do have some data for beyond 1.5 billion years. And that has to do with at least 2 things. Number one is the light travel from distant galaxies. We've seen galaxies far away. So if they're, say, a billion light years away, and if light reached here, then the universe is at least a billion years old. That's one theory, or that's one argument. And number 2, we do have what is radiometric methods of looking at time. And according to that, you check the rocks and do some studies. Well, it comes to billions of years. So those 2 will form on that side. Are there any evidences that show less than 10 million, less than this? And when you look at that, you find some very peculiar things on Earth, and we can see it. For example, when you look at the delta region of rivers, we know today, we can check how much of silt material that the river is bringing to the delta region and how much collects at the delta region. We know the surface area, we know the depth also. So we know the volume of silt that the river has brought all these years. Now, when you look at that, when you look at all the delta regions of the world, there is no delta region that has a volume of silt that computes to more than 4,000 years. That's it. No river then has been running on Earth for more than 4,000 years. And we are not talking about million now, 4,000. How about carbon dating? People talk about carbon dating all the time. How does carbon form? The photons from the sun hit the upper atmospheres of the Earth and hits at the nitrogen molecule and makes it into the radioactive carbon. That comes in and it goes through a cycle on Earth. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the amount of carbon-14, which is the radioactive carbon that is formed, and the amount that is decayed and goes off, at some point will have to come to an equilibrium. In other words, equal amount coming in, equal amount going out. The father of carbon dating made this calculation that if we start from a certain point in the scientific terms, then on Earth, this equilibrium in the atmosphere would take place within 30,000 years, less than 30,000 years. And when you look at the rate that is coming in and the rate that is going out, it still has not reached equilibrium. So the Earth's atmosphere, we can say by that study, less than 30,000 years. So it's pointing towards less than 10,000 years. So I'm just giving you some examples of a response to somebody who says, yes, there are big numbers in the age on one side and very small numbers on the other. But when you do the weight of evidence, then it seems to point to the shorter side. Now, how do you explain the long ones? Well, that if you want, we can do it. Otherwise, we can have it for another time. Any questions?
Yeah, following on from what you've just said about carbon dating, someone's just asked, we use carbon dating in many things. Can it be trusted?
Carbon dating is an important aspect of science today. First of all, we should know what the half-life, you know what the half-life is? Well, it really doesn't matter. I'm just going to say, use the word half-life. The half-life of carbon, radioactive carbon, is 5,730 years. So if you have too many half-lives of your test, after a certain amount, the test is not accurate. About 8 or 9, it becomes inaccurate. And when it goes to about 11 or 12 or 13, it becomes very difficult. And in fact, less than 20, more than 20, I think it goes off. So when you look at the half-life, 8 to 10 of half-lives would be about 40 to 50,000 years. So if you're looking at something that is less in age, then the accuracy of 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 years, that might be used or might be accurate when we do the dating. But beyond that, we can't use. In fact, you can't use carbon dating for more than 100,000 years. People talk about carbon dating, but actually in the back of their mind, they are talking about another radioisotope or the other isotopes like uranium and potassium argon and all the other ones. Those go into billions of years. Carbon dating, no. Carbon dating can only work for less than, say, 40 or 50,000 years. So is it good for those billions of years? No. Is it good for the smaller ones? Yeah, you can use it for the smaller ones. So have I answered the question, or is there something else to it?
Dr. Pandit.
Yes.
Hi. Yeah, Pastor Masumbi here.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, just throwing a question.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure who the lady was who was manning the question, but if there is no question, can I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead. There's no other questions.
There's no other question? Okay. Yeah, Dr. Pandit, how do we respond to the discoveries of these human skulls that are found across the earth, that they say, I know, like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania,
yes,
where they say the earliest human skull was found, and this takes us to millions of years. And then they come across a lot of these discoveries that seem to point that way. When they look at the features, the person does not look really human. They're kind of subhuman, subanimal, or ape and stuff like that. How do we answer those kind of questions?
You have actually asked 3 to 5 questions in that one question.
Okay.
So
okay.
Shall we narrow it to one by one? Which one would you like? For example,
okay.
The question, one of the questions you've asked is about millions of years. So what we're doing there, what they do is they don't date the bones. You can't do that because bones can be dated only by carbon. And like I said, carbon is only a few thousand years. So what they do is they date the rocks in which the bones are found. So so that's the way they do it. Now the question is that dating reasonable? Is the dating of rocks reasonable? And even then, you have to show that the bone was deposited at the time when the rock was formed, and we have no way of settling that because nobody was there. So when you find a fossil, for example, in a rock, we presume that the fossil was found in that rock at the time of its formation, but it's an assumption. That's number one. Number two, you test that rock. That's all you can test. So when you test the rock, you use certain methods to test it. Now, in any scientific test, I hope some of you have done a little bit of scientific tests. If you use a gadget, for example, you have to first standardize the gadget. Only if you standardize the gadget can you put some material into that and bring out a conclusion that is reasonable. If it is not standardized, then you can get variable answers with variable stuff that you put into that gadget. So the gadget first has to be standardized. So this question of radiometric analysis has to be standardized. The whole process. Let's try it out. So we go to a place where we know what the age of the rock is. For example, we know that Mount St. Helens in northern Washington erupted. We know it erupted in the 1980s. And then when it erupted, the lava came out and formed rock. The lava became rock. So now we know the age of that rock. So we can take the age, take the piece of the rock and bring to the laboratory and check according to according to the test of radiometric dating. So here's what happens, and it has happened, and we have data on it. You take a piece of rock and grind it up, and you can test it for the whole rock. You can also test it for different components of the rock because each rock is made of different components. So we have two ways of testing now. Test the whole piece of rock or test components after breaking it up into its components. Now, when you do that, you're supposed to see the ages of both of them equal. Only then we will know it is the rock. That is showing the age. So let me look at maybe two pieces of information. When you do the age of the rock and when you do the age of certain components of the rock, the different components give different ages. So how much confidence do you have in the process if the different components giving different ages? And the ages are not small differences, huge differences. How about the rock itself? We know the rock, say, is 50 years old. What was the age by the test that was done by the radiometric dating? It's 50 years old, but do you know what the dating showed by the radiometric dating methods? 210 million years old. 50-year-old rock, which we know is 50, is showing 200 to 300 million years old. How can you trust that kind of a test? So the system itself has not been standardized. Why is it not standardized? That's the question now. It's because we are assuming certain things in the test which cannot be proved. For example, you are assuming that when you test and compare what was at the beginning point, the beginning original point must be 100% parent isotope and 0 daughter isotope, because that's the way they tested how much became the other. How much of one form changed to the other over a period of time, and that ratio multiplied by the half-life will give you the actual age. But for that to be accurate, you must start with 100% parent isotope in the rock and 0% daughter isotope in that rock. who can vouch for that? Nobody was there at that time. So it's an assumption that we are saying. So if it was not 100% and zero, your calculations are gone. So we have assumed that it's 100% and zero. Number two assumption, that the rate of change is exactly equal to what we are now seeing even a million years ago. Today's test, we are applying to a million years ago. Is that valid? It could be, but we cannot establish that. So that was assumption number two, that we are looking at the rate today and applying it to what was there a million years ago, 500 million years ago. We have no way of testing that. Number three, for that test to be actually accurate, you must make sure that it is a closed system. What's the meaning of a closed system? A system in which nothing can be taken out and nothing can be added. You can't add or take out the parent isotope, and you can't add or take out the daughter isotope, because if you add or take out, then your whole calculation is going to be wrong. So that requires what is called a closed system. Nothing going out, nothing coming in. But alas, there is no closed system at all in nature. There is no place on earth that is so closed. Isotopes can go out and in, parent out, daughter in, anything can happen. You can have a little bit of water, then it'll dissolve the stuff. That changes the whole equation. So we are assuming it's a closed system when we can show that there is no closed system in nature at all. So based on, say, these three, the system itself is not standardized. If the system is not standardized, we cannot really trust the numbers that come out, especially if you test it against what I've just shown you, a sample that we know the age of. We know the age is 50, and if it shows 300 million years, then so based on that, we say, yeah, the radiometric thing does point to there, but if somebody questions it, you have no way of answering that question. So the question has to be thrown back. Can you please establish it for us so that we will know that the actual age that you are saying can be established? You cannot establish it. That is one way of looking at it. Number two, is there another question, or shall I just carry on?
There are some other questions, but you can finish.
I can finish this. I'll just finish with one.
Yeah, finish it.
The two theories, you mentioned the gorge in Tanzania, and the theory, it's called Out of Africa. The theory is called Out of Africa. In other words, right now the DNA studies show that the earliest humans came out of East North Africa. Think. Really think. So it has to come out from there. How did it go to the rest of the world? It would have to go through the northern part of Africa. And what's the northern part of Africa? Palestine. That is where the whole biblical first 10 chapters of Genesis reside. That's from where it came out. So what they are showing is you had to go through Palestine. So the theory actually coincides with the biblical theory. From there, it went out to the whole world. So Africa, yes, but if you put Palestine, it's not very far. So both the theories are correct. Number two, genetic studies, DNA studies have shown that it went out from there in one single dispersion. At one time it went out, and it went out in groups. Think. One single dispersion, and they went out in groups. What does the book of Genesis say? They went out according to their languages, according to their groups. They went out. One single dispersion went out in groups. Same as what the scientific information now is. Here's another scientific piece of information, and that is that Um, just a moment, it slipped my mind. Yes, the theory is, out of Africa theory, is there was a huge population, and then the population came suddenly to a bottleneck by an event that was very catastrophic and knocked off almost the whole population and left a small population, and that small population then evolved to our present population. Why do they have big population and then small population and then big population like we have today? Because if you have it only big and continuing to be big, our population on earth would be 50 or 100 times more than what we have today. So they have to have a theory in which it is contracted at a certain point. And it had to be a catastrophic event. Big, contracted to a small, and then became big again. That's exactly the book of Genesis. Big, worldwide flood, only 8 individuals, and they formed the rest of us. So I've given you some evidence to say that this theory has a certain basis so that we can stand in front of people and say, yeah, it makes good sense. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, yes, it is. Although it still leaves me with a question, but let me leave a chance for others to ask.
Just mention your question so I can keep.
Okay. Thinking. When we go back to the gorge, Olduvai Gorge, the skeleton of the earliest human, you see the features are different. They are similar to the ones that we see in evolution. That the argument is that, okay, this is what we looked like. We looked like apes, and then we slowly developed and changed over time to the way that we are today. So doesn't that then, if we were to accept the out of Africa theory,
yes,
doesn't that then also open a can of worms to say, oh, okay, actually there is some truth in the fact that, or is there enough evidence to suggest that actually humans evolved to some extent? So that was the follow-up question.
Yeah, good question. So let's go to somebody else and then I'll come back to this if we have time.
Okay.
Okay. The next person on the chat asked, did dinosaurs inhabit the earth?
Oh, yes. I'm not sure why they ask. And this question keeps coming every time, especially in Christian circles. I'm not sure why they ever ask that question. Because if you go to any museum of the world, there are actual skeletons of dinosaurs that are 50 feet high in height. We can see them, you can touch them. So the question is, of course, there were dinosaurs on Earth. I'm not sure what the question really is. So if the person can ask, what is the real question? I'm not sure.
That was basically the question. So
Okay,
there's 2 more questions on the chat. The second one was, I think you've also mentioned this. How old would you say the Earth is approximately?
We can say the Earth is less than 10,000 years old, approximately. Now, what you then do, well, look, like I said right in the beginning, yesterday actually, whenever you have a question of controversy, please make 2 theories. That's what we did just a moment ago. It's less than 10,000 or more than 1.5 billion years old. So we look at a small number and we look at a big number, and then we compare what the data is and put them there. And once we do that, then we look at the weight of evidence. And when we look at the weight of evidence, I gave you one just reverse. You can look at the sky also, and you can look at the moon also, and you can find out that some of these things point to a young Earth. So I would say less than 10,000. That's number one. Number two of that question is, when you do that, then you recognize that the biblical narrative now does say less than 10. So in that sense, we are with the biblical narrative. So now then we should go to the Bible and find out what it says. And then we look at our genealogy, how people have kept the dates all along and go right through way back and go to the books of Moses. And when you actually calculate that, it comes definitely to 6,000 years and odd. Mm. But you don't have to be so rigid on that. We can say it is young, very young. It is not millions, it is not billions of years old.
Okay. Thank you for that. And the last question is in two parts. The question is dendrochronology a valid method of dating the world? And if so, can we date the world from this method?
Again, the question of dating, we just saw just a moment ago, this has to do with, again, rocks and the question of which element you are going to use. They are all radioactive elements. And this chronology does two or three things and put them all together so that some certain unestablished factors can be thrown away and become more accurate. So, but when you look at that, here again, take one of those factors or one of those tests and put it onto a rock that of known age. They have done it more than once. One is the rock from Mount St. Helens, where that explosion took place and the lava came out. It was a huge volcano. And the other is in New Zealand, and that also is dated. So when you look at rocks from two different places and do the same test, we find that even this dendrochronology is not accurate because of those assumptions that I just mentioned. Those assumptions still are valid no matter what type of test you use. So yeah, that it sounds good, and it is actually a smart method to take away some unwanted factor that might knock your test away, but it doesn't take away everything. The main assumptions still are unanswered.
Okay, thank you for that. With response to the question that was asked about if dinosaurs existed, the person that questioned has said, I asked because were the animals at that time large because Adam and Eve were around 18 feet tall?
That cause and effect can't be established. You can't say because they were tall, the animals were big. What we do know that there's a question that those people were bigger than us, mm-hmm. because we have found bones that are bigger of humans. So we can guess that they were. So when you guess that way and look at some information, and then when you do look at some ancient writings like the Torah, and in which they say that there were some humans who lived for 1,000 years old, 900 years old, then you can just deduce from that they were big. But how big they were, we can ask somebody else, but we can never vouch for that. So it's a reasonable thing. Big people and big animals, yes, of course. We can say it sounds reasonable.
Okay. There's also a last question that's popped up. Sorry, Ikwisa, then we'll go to your question.
No problem.
The question says, are you aware that there are writers who write about the voice? And one of the writers, Theodore Diamond, states, the muscles of the throat are also evolved millions of years before we use them as part of the vocal mechanism, and they form an essential part of the vocal instrument. How best should I address such comment?
Like I said, when you see anything that's of controversy, look at what is being proposed. And I'm not sure what is being proposed, what is the focus of that question, whether it is the vocal cords or whether it is the million years, or which part is actually the focus of the question. So here's what I would do. I would look at that and divide it up into those portions of the questions and I will make an opposite theory on each part.
Okay.
So let's take just one.
Maybe this will help you. The question has also said, my question I asked is because I'm to write an essay that shares my likes and dislikes about the writer, and that's part of their studies. So
what we can do is acknowledge. I would acknowledge and say, yeah, the writer is a smart guy because he put 2 and 2 together. But just putting 2 and 2 together can't be everything, because if there are 10 facts, then why are you just taking 2? You know what I mean? Okay, so when we look at this, we say, we'll take one thing, the million years, and we say it is a million years, and we say it is not a million years. So there are now 2 theories. So we will have to ask this writer, how did you come to the idea that it's a million years? And he will give you his reasons. And when you look at the reasons, it'll always be related to the theory of evolution, always. So here's another factor. How do the people actually, when the like I said, the gadget is not standardized, how will they make out that this is it? It's very strange. I'll tell you how they do it. They look at the rock, and they can only date the rock. They cannot date the fossil. So how do they know that the date of the rock is correct? We are saying that assumptions are not yet set and established. So what they do is they date the rock not by the radioactive method, not by the radiometric method. They date the rock by the fossil. The fossil is called an index fossil. There are index fossils in the gradation on the Earth's surface. At this depth, you'll find this index fossil, and if this index fossil is found there, then the rock is this many years old. So how do we get the age of the index fossil? From the theory of evolution. So now we are basing it back onto the theory of evolution, and now let's ask, how is the theory of evolution established? Oh, by the age of the rock. Now can you see what's happening? The age of the rock is established by the theory of evolution, and the theory of evolution itself is based by the theory age of the rock. That is called circular reasoning. There is no standardization of this at all. So when anybody says it's a million years old, the question really would be, are you depending on the theory of evolution? If it is, then I can show you that most probably it is not scientific, and you can use some of the material that I've given you today to show that it doesn't. So if you're going to say it's a million years old and it was there all along, the next question is, when we looked at the different types of evolution, if you noticed, there was, for example, cosmic evolution, stellar evolution, and then we came to this Darwinian evolution. Now, when you look at, say, he's talking about the vocal cords.
Yeah.
The question is, let's go back and say where the vocal cords came from anyway. Where did they come from? So you'll have to go to another word, origin. How did the vocal cord originate from a previous organism that did not have a vocal cord? I'll give you a very, very, what should I call, a very crass illustration. Viruses and bacteria do not have vocal cords. But finally we came from there, right? So the question is, where did the vocal cord originate? It's not just where. You see, you have to have a set of genes, of DNA material that can then form the proteins to form the vocal cord. So you must have a set of genes first. Where did that set of genes come from to make the vocal cords? So now we are studying the origin of the vocal cords. And when you do that, you'll have to go way back into the theory of evolution and go right to the top, which is cosmic evolution. When you go to cosmic evolution, you have to say, like we saw yesterday, that you have to start from absolutely nothing. So how scientific is that? So when you look at it backwards, when you go backwards, the million years will not stand scrutiny in a scientific manner. So I'm suggesting that when a person says this, you say, yes, your 2 and 2 will show you that. But if you add another 10 by 10, then it doesn't show that at all, because there may be another theory which is much better than that.
Thank you for that. And in terms of time and the questions that have not managed to be answered, we will forward them to Dr. Pandit, and hopefully at some point he will be able to address them throughout the time that we're together. But I will leave it there for today. And thank you very much, Dr. Pandit, for being with us, and also for giving us the further insight into this topic, evolution. Really, I want to thank also the viewers as well, and those also that have sent in their questions. Thank you for your contribution as well. And I'd ask that you join us tomorrow again from 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. and that's UK time, when Dr. Pandit will address the question, relativism, can opposite claims be equally true, or pluralism, are all religions basically the same? Thank you once again, Dr. Pandit, for tonight, and thank you, viewers, for joining us, and I hope to see you tomorrow.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow.